Does clothing represent our sin? And this is a question that was asked by Katrina, and she didn't want to do a video on it, so I'm going to try to do that. Now, let's go back to the original issue of sin, and when it first happened in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. And let's look at a few things there. One, some people would say, oh, it's got to be sex. But that's not fitting at all, because Genesis 1:28, which is before the fall, says, be fruitful and multiply. That's right after God had blessed them in Genesis 1:27. So he's telling them to be fruitful and multiply. Which brings up the next question. At the time of the fall, was Eve pregnant? She could have been. We don't know that. One way or the other, we don't know. We can't add, we can't subtract. It's just, it's possible. And it's also interesting because before the fall, when Eve is created, in Genesis 2:24, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. This is Adam saying this. This is not God. This is Adam saying this. How does Adam know what a mother or father is? Just something to think about there. He's making a comment about something he might have seen in the animal kingdom, but he certainly hadn't seen anywhere else. And Genesis 2:25, Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. So naked is the baseline, and I'm actually going to start from there and go up a little bit. And specifically, I think, as always, when Satan is used, what he thinks he's doing as harm is actually creating the benefit. And what I mean by this is, at the time that Adam and Eve were created, they're naked, so they are just like all the other creatures. They're just like the lion, just like the cat, the dog, the cow, whatever. They're an animal form at that point in time. They're obviously they're able to speak. They're exercising dominion over the earth. But have they started elevating themselves? And does the Creator use Satan, who thinks he's doing harm, to actually elevate the situation? And let's kind of go into this. That's just a background thought that you should have. In Genesis 3, which is in the fall of mankind from the sin, after they ate, Genesis 3:7, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So immediately upon gaining sight, or sinning, they realize they're naked and they have to cover themselves. So they make their own clothes out of fig leaves. Genesis 3:8. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees in the garden. So they're hiding at this point in time because they realize we've sinned, we've done something horrifying. Genesis 3:9, but the Lord called to the man, where are you? In Genesis 3:10, he answered. It's interesting. He's called, he answers. With the Creator, it's not like a person who, if you're hiding from them and they call out to you, you're going to still hide. This is the Creator. You can't avoid these things. When he calls out, where are you? You got to answer. You can't hide. The fact you're hiding and wanting to hide changes nothing. He answers, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Now, what's interesting at this point in time, again, is clothing the aspect of sin, that covering. And what are you covering? You're covering your flesh. When it says flesh, do you not think of skin? That's, flesh is skin. And the interesting thing, Genesis 3:21, the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Would that have included tzitzit? I don't see how it wouldn't have included tzitzit. It doesn't say we can't add, we can't subtract. But God's not going to put you in a situation where you're sinning. So I would say it would have to have included tzitzit, which we'll get into what would tzitzit really mean here. And again, Adam was created in the image of God. Are we in his image anymore because we have sinned? We have all this sin covering our flesh. Are we in his image anymore? Is the clothing trying to cover the sin? And so when you think about, we're told to dress modestly. Basically, don't call attention to yourself. Don't call attention to maybe the skin. When you're dressing immodestly, what are you trying to do? You're trying to, especially for a woman, she's trying to draw attention to her skin. That's the sin. The battle is our flesh. And again, the flesh is skin. The sin of our outer selves. Flesh in the Old Testament is basar, B-A-S-A-R. And in the New Testament, it's sarx, S-A-R-X. And again, I start thinking now on tzitzit. Is tzitzit a covering for the skin? Where do we wear our tzitzits? We wear our tzitzits on the outer section of our clothing. And so is that a covering for that sin? If we're there seeing it. Now, let's also think about this. What are the clothing for the angels and for the Creator and the Messiah? Do they have clothing when they're in heaven? Because originally we're walking around like animals. We're no different than a dog or a cat. We exist, and our private parts are hanging out, and it's just what it is. And there was no shame because we were just an animal in basic terms, even though we were formed in the image. When it comes to it, we have a couple different entities that are mentioned. One, we can look in the New Testament, Daniel 24:4. The angel, there are two of them there. They have dazzling clothes. Now, do they wear the same dazzling clothes when they're in heaven? Again, if it's dazzling clothes, I would think it's a clothing that came from heaven. Acts 1:2. Again, these angels are dressed in white. But again, these are both times on earth. Do we know about how they're dressed other than that? I don't know that we do. The cherubim have 6 wings. Isaiah 6, verse 2. And there are 2 wings covering, I said 6, I'm sure that's 8. There are 2 wings covering their feet, 2 wings covering their faces, and 2 wings they use that are basically for flight. So the private parts aren't an issue. I assume they have them. It doesn't say. I can't add, can't subtract. Maybe there's clothing there. Maybe there's not. Doesn't say. It doesn't mention anything. Ezekiel 1:24, the 4 living creatures. And looking at the 4 living creatures, the only thing we had that would mention something about clothing is in verse 23. And under the vault of their wings were stretched out one toward the other, and each one had 2 wings covering its body. So are the clothes there acting like clothes, or are the wings acting like clothes? It's possible, or it just could be covering the body. We can't really add or subtract. What it's there for, I don't know. But I do know this from Daniel 7:9. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Now, the Ancient of Days taking his seat, that's most likely unlikely to be on earth, and will show that it's not here. His garment was white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. Well, the wheels all ablaze, that's from the 4 living creatures, I would think. And again, he is wearing a garment white as snow. So that's certainly appearing to me to be heavenly in aspect, and I see clothing there. So maybe it's an aspect that clothing is what separates us from the animals. And so what Satan tried to do actually has worked out towards benefit. Now again, when we come back in our transformed bodies, are we going to be clothed? I don't know. I can't answer that. It doesn't say. I can't add something there that's not there. And he's not coming down and told me something one way or the other on this. I've not had some prophecy. I've not heard some voice. This is just a question. But it's an interesting thing because, again, we hear Solomon was dressed up basically like a peacock, or the flowers. And again, we're told to be modest in dress. Is that because we should be ashamed of the sin? It's just, It's just something out there, and I can't go beyond what I've kind of said already. The other issue is as it pertains to circumcision. Now, again, if we're talking about sins of the flesh, or generally if you're thinking about a male, you're thinking about your private parts, and we know that one of the issues there for a command is a circumcision. So to cut away at some of that flesh, to exercise control over that part of the body. Just something to think about. It's just a couple questions that I have.